My name is Jessica Harris. I teach music at Jefferson Academy Middle School. Today I'm going to be presenting a model of the assignment in week 1 of your distance learning packet for music for students in grades 6 through 8.
Hi, my name is Nathan Bergman. I am from Silver Spring, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C., and I've lived in Washington, D.C. for the last 6 years.
Talk to me about yourself as a musician. How is music a part of your life right now?
I am a full-time career musician, and I got into it by um, having to choose between going to art school and being a traveling musician, and I chose the traveling musician.
Well, what kind of music do you play? And talk to me about like what has influenced you as a musician.
I think the music that I play is based in like I guess I would say American music, blues, country roots, folk, soul. And my love of artists that my parents kind of passed on to me. So like lots of R&B, folk, soul, classic rock.
What instrument do you play?
I play guitar and I sing.
Would you be willing to share something that you've written or performed?
Um, yeah, sure, I can do that. I wrote this song called Ode to Manchester.
Okay.
And I wrote this song while I was traveling in England, and I kind of got stranded there due to this whole. I mean, the reason why we're video conferencing in the first place,
Okay.
shut down. So. Got the call in Manchester as the rain fell to the street. I lost the only friend who didn't give up on me. Who do you call when you're lost? Who do you call and at what cost? How do you get home when you're 10,000 miles away? How do you stay dry when all you feel is rain? I thought I saw the sunshine breaking through the clouds, but that was just the headlights of some car that's leaving town.
I can definitely hear in your song the influence, like American music blended there.
Right, like the American Songbook, which goes back to like the beginning of blues all the way through folk and country, is I think quite influential on what I do.
Can you talk about your creative process when you were producing a song like that?
I think the creative process is really about trying to document where you are at a certain point in your life, or at a certain emotional place, or a certain even a physical place, and documenting it really just means trying to write out the experience in a way that other people can relate to it, which means understanding the words that you're singing and feeling the emotion of the melody, because the melody really influences how people interpret what you're saying or singing about.
What does your career entail, and what is day-to-day life?
So I think at the end of the day, it's really because it's the opposite of having a structured job.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you make of it. So I think you have to kind of make a schedule according to what makes you the most productive. Generally, I make time to be creative in the sense of trying to write a song or trying to think of a melody that I had in the shower last night, or just working my way towards getting some of the creativity out. And then you have to apply that creativity to something that is, I think, real world. So to be a musician now means you have to be on social media. So to provide content for social media, not just like what I ate for breakfast, but something that pertains to the music that I did for the day, whether it was recording a cover song that I liked or letting people know about what stuff I'm doing musically.
When I was a music major in college, I was practicing a lot every day on my instrument. And now
Right.
that I've moved into teaching, that looks a little different. Are you putting in a lot of hours still to practice?
Hours and hours of practice, yeah, every day. Yep.
Okay,
Whether
got
whether that means singing, writing, or playing guitar.
it.
Um, and your voice is your instrument too. So I
Right,
always look at it like I have to kind of keep that in tune.
right. Do you collaborate with any other musicians?
Constantly. Today, I'm working on a collaboration with a woman in New York named Natalie Safar, and she is a cellist. And I will be digitally recording music here, videotaping it, sending it to her. She'll play over it, videotape it, and then we'll split screen it and put it on the internet for everyone to see.
That's awesome. Well, I think that concludes the questions I had for you today. Um,
Cool. Thanks for
thank you.
having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for participating, and
Of
I will
course.
hope to hear some of your music soon.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right,
Hey
thank you.
everybody, my name is Elijah Jamal Balbed. I was born in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland. While in high school, I became serious about and fell in love with jazz music, and I started playing saxophone when I was 11 years old, um, and proceeded to go to Howard University, which brought me back into D.C., studied jazz studies at Howard, and while I was a student at Howard, I started to also become a part of the music scene in Washington, D.C. In 2011, while a student at Howard, I started performing with the godfather of go-go, Chuck Brown, before he passed away, and got to play with him the last year of his life. Um, and that's what propelled my love for go-go music along with jazz music. So now I have a band called the Jogo Project, which basically continues the tradition of what Chuck Brown did, is having go-go music where people are dancing in between songs as opposed to stopping in between songs, but also keeping the jazz parts of the music really strong, like a horn section, jazz melodies, and things like that.
You mentioned that you started studying jazz and then that morphed into go-go music. Can you talk to me about like what's that relationship between the two?
One thing they both have in common is there's a rich history of both styles of music in DC. During the Harlem Renaissance, there was also a renaissance happening in Washington, D.C. called Black Broadway. And Chuck Brown, who started as a jazz and blues musician, ended up creating go-go kind of in the 70s into the 80s. One thing they don't have in common is that jazz is celebrated nationally and internationally. And go-go is a little bit, but for the most part, it's unique to the Washington, D.C. area. You're mostly going to find go-go here in D.C.
You're sharing a very rich history. Why is that important for you to like know? And do you feel a part of that history? Do you think it's important?
Yeah, I mean, some of my elders when I was in high school and college would always encourage me to learn the history of the style of music I'm learning along with the actual genre. Knowing what came before you really helps inform your opinion and inform you as an artist. And in my opinion, that's one issue with what's happening with gentrification.
They
And
don't
although
know that go-go music even exists, right?
yeah, and then so that led to a whole thing where there is a movement to try to, in a way, silence go-go music at places that it had been being played at for decades before people moved to these areas, and all of
Can
a
you
sudden,
talk about that event that took place?
yeah, Mochella was basically the result of a lot of complaints about go-go music being played at the T-Mobile store at Georgia 7th, Georgia in Florida, or 7th
Yeah.
Street in Florida. Instead of silencing the music, the entire city came together in support of the music, and they had the biggest go-go you ever saw out exactly where they were trying to silence the music. So in a way, it was just a lesson that you can't silence a culture, and you have to be careful about, what came before you.
Yes. So there's musical characteristics about go-go, and how do you find that those elements are linked to like the meaning or the movement of go-go music. Is there a relationship between those two?
Starts with the percussion. I mean, the percussion was, if I'm not mistaken, the first musical instrument, the hand drum.
Yep.
And it's how people told stories and communicated. So there's always been a deeply personal connection with the hand drum.
Right.
And in go-go, you have that hand drum, those conga drums going consistently the entire song, sometimes the entire night. The drummer and the percussionist in a go-go band are the hardest working members of the band. Something about that continuous groove and drive and motion that I think it connects with people and just gets people to connect with the music on a deeper level.
What do you think is powerful about how the audience interacts with the music rather than the band just being a performer?
Well, that's touching actually on kind of like the differences between jazz and go-go a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
Because growing up, I mostly played straight ahead jazz. It was a totally different experience jumping from that, going to my first gig with Chuck Brown. The audience started in their seats.
Right. Yes.
And it's because that's what you're used to at a go-go. You're usually standing up and dancing.
Yeah.
And so in a way, that first gig with Chuck Brown was a big lesson about how big a role the audience can play in the music.
What creative process do you guys go through to create your music? Are you writing your own things?
The Jogo project, it's mostly the same people on every gig with a few exceptions. So we basically rehearse a couple times before our show just to touch up on things. But there are some bands that rehearse weekly or rehearse on a more recurring basis. But for us, we just basically take it from case to case. If we have more concerts coming up, then we might rehearse more. Yeah.
So you mentioned that your primary instrument is the saxophone. I know that you play other instruments. Can you tell me about those?
I started on sax, but I always had instruments around me growing up. My mom kept just a lot of different instruments, like a xylophone, a mini harmonica. In high school, I started working at Dale Music in Silver Spring, and they had instruments laying around all the time. And there was oftentimes, hours would go by where not many people would come into the store. And so I would get, 15, 20 minutes here and there to mess around on electric bass.
Would you be willing to share something, play something for us? It could be something you wrote or something you're working on.
Sure. This will just be a quick snippet of the third movement of a suite I wrote. The suite is called the Karma Suite, and this song is called In Nature We Trust, which is dedicated to the environment and taking care of the environment better.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No problem.
While I was listening, I was trying to pick out what elements you included in your composition and in your playing that might relate to the environment. Can you talk to us about that?
For each of these songs, it was basically like I read an article or saw a video and then went straight to the piano and wrote something.
Oh, wow.
And that's why I do encourage my students to play some piano, even if it's just
Yeah.
basic 3-chord voicings, because it helps you hear harmonies and more notes other than just the one note you can play on a saxophone.
Yes.
But also to help you start composing, because if you can play even basic piano, you can compose your own song. A melody with long tones and kind of like an earthy feel. And so that's what kind of inspired me to make that song about the environment.
What values or disciplines do you believe music has taught you, or being a musician really brings out in people?
It's made me a better communicator, for sure. I was always a more shy kid. I did 2 tours in Russia now, so performing, in different countries and for different cultures. It really gets you out of your comfort zone and forces you to, it makes you more curious, more genuinely curious about other things. And so that's made me more of a better communicator and better at networking too, and making, creating opportunity for myself using that networking.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview with me. I really hope that I can see you live sometime soon, and if not, maybe during this time we'll be in touch via video.
Yeah, glad to do it.